No, there is no way to deny the fact that we are here present.
It's intuitive, right?
It's intuitive.
Excellent. So there are certain...
It's intuitive and observational.
No. You don't need to observe something to know that it exists necessarily, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're asking for the impossible.
That's true.
Right. So the present is something we agree with.
Yeah.
Now, could the present have come about without a past?
No.
No. Why? Because what determines how we reach the present is through the law of causality.
Yes, correct.
You agree with that?
I agree with that.
Is there any way this might be negated?
No, it would not be negated within the universe.
Yeah, good. So we know, therefore, that it is the law of causality that allows us to reach the present moment in time.
Yes.
If there is no God, there are only three possibilities. One, we can safely say doesn't apply. It applies, but it would entail us claiming that impossible I don't know, which is essentially I don't want to know, turn my brain off, I don't want to think about it. That leaves, if we knock that out, that leaves only two options. Either the universe is eternal, or the universe had a beginning.
The universe being eternal cannot happen, because if the universe was eternal, then we wouldn't reach this point, because that is an infinite regress.
Excellent.
Right? So infinite regresses cannot exist, therefore only the third option is true. Well, I agree with that, alright? However, my question to you is, when you base the contingency argument and say...
Can I just quickly, before you give the contingency argument, I don't subscribe to the idea that the creator of all things brought the universe into existence from a timeless state of affairs. I believe that the creator has always been creating one thing after another with no single thing, and this is important if you just pay attention to this part, with no single thing being eternal, concomitant with the creator. I don't believe that the creator was at one point absolutely inactive, in occupying a timeless state of affairs, and then suddenly decided to create. Why? Because I believe that is rationally impossible to claim that a being exists that we describe as being God, who is all knowledgeable and all wise, that existed at a point, an instance, I should say. Now, an instance, let me define what an instance is. An instance is the smallest possible point of recognition.
Okay.
A moment is a period defined by two instances, the beginning instance and the end instance. And a moment can only take place within time, because you're measuring one thing against the other. An instance can either be a timeless state of affairs, as they say, or a temporal state of affairs. The idea that God occupied a timeless state, an instance, a timeless instance, and then decided to create, goes against the concept of wisdom that we ascribe to God. Because wisdom is putting everything in its rightful place. So the people who subscribe to the idea that God began to create, they say that God freely chose to create. You might have heard this.
I have heard this, yeah.
He freely chose to create, meaning if he wanted to, he could carry on being alone in that timeless instance. Now the question then is, there is no freedom here for this creator, because freedom entails, at the very minimum, a choice between two possibilities. A minimum choice of two possibilities. And you whittle those two possibilities down to one. But if this creator occupies a timeless instance, that's the only state of affairs it can occupy. So it can't decide. The decision has already been made.
So you're saying God does not have free will?
I'm saying the God of ex nihilo, who creates from nothing, cannot have free will to choose anything.
From X, okay, the first choice cannot be free.
It can't be free.
So you're saying
and neither
is necessary.
And neither is it wise.
Okay.
So therefore, the creator brought the universe into existence from preceding matter.
Preceding matter. Can
yes.
you define that?
Something that is contingent upon the creator, him bringing that thing, him forming that, and manipulating that and transforming it from one state to another, into another, into another.
Okay.
And he's constantly been doing this.
Yes, but my first initial question was, how do you know that the laws of logic apply outside the universe?
Because the laws of logic are universal. Because if we're claiming that if we're claiming any type of truth claim, truths cannot be known except that we have to, intuitively we have to recognize them as a basis for our claim to truth. If we deny the law of logic, nothing sacred that we are claiming to be true holds to be true.
I agree. I'm not denying the laws of logic. I'm saying the laws of logic exist, yes. We follow them, yes. They give us a direction to truth, yes. But how do you know they expand beyond the universe? Like within this universe, I can say the apple falls down, and the apple either falls down or doesn't, and that's both true because of the law of non-contradiction.
Bring me any hypothetical. Let's talk about, let's just say, for instance, there was a turtle that existed before this universe was brought into existence. Any truth claim, irrespective of any world that we speak about, has to be undergirded. It has to be founded upon the law of non-contradiction, because otherwise, to claim that for example, a turtle exists presupposes that you have to affirm the law of non-contradiction.
Exactly.
Otherwise, the turtle existing and not existing can be true.
Yeah, exactly.
Therefore, you can't escape to ask the question, how do we know that the law of non-contradiction applies to a universe beyond this one, is like a self-defeating statement. The very point you're making has to affirm the law of non-contradiction in order to make any type of truth claim.
Right.
So if a person denies, like the Christians do, they deny the law of non-contradiction in order to try and affirm that their God can exist in two contradictory states. At the very point at which they open their mouths to make a truth claim, they've already defeated their truth statement. So these are properly basic things that God has created within the human being in order to make sense of the world. And since we can't make a paradigm shift, like I said at the beginning, beyond our rationale, we're bound by these universal bi-valued laws. Now, if that is true, then we have to ask ourselves, the universe, therefore, is sustained, given it's being sustained now in the present, by a source beyond ourselves. We have to ask ourselves the following. In existence, there is nothing that exists except that it must be qualified by attributes. There's nothing that we know of that exists except that it has to be qualified by attributes.
I agree, yes.
You agree with that?
Yeah.
Good. If that's true of the smallest, most insignificant things, like the quark or the muon or the gluon, that must be true of those things that are more complicated, because the more complicated something is, the more attributes it has. That is a universal law that we can subscribe to. Yeah. To claim otherwise is to make that irrational paradigm shift beyond our thinking. Right. So if we hold to that, we understand, therefore, that if we as human beings have greater attributes than that flag, the Palestinian flag, that which is greater than us has to have attributes that are more perfect, if you will.
But how do you define greater in this context?
The creator of all things is the one that brings everything into existence, but itself...
Greater. Sorry. Like you said...
greater. Sorry, I thought you said creator.
And complex. How do you define these two terms over here?
By looking at the attributes that determine an existent thing. So for instance, how do we determine something?
By looking at its identity.
Exactly.
Right?
Perfect. We look at something and we can determine through the way we look at it that thing is distinct from another thing.
Yes.
Now, looking at it, therefore, we can make an abstraction of it. We can say that thing has an essence and it has attributes.
Right.
This essence and this attributes, however, are not things that exist outside of that thing. These are things that we are abstracting with our mind to determine what that thing is.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. So we can therefore say, for instance, that flag has attributes that
rectangular, of
exactly
certain colors, of
dimensions,
having
being in time,
fluid, yes.
less than we have, because we have the ability to be able to think at the abstract level, and with that comes further definitions of attributes.
Right, I agree.
You agree with this?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Now, how do we determine the degree of an attribute? It is in its actualization. You can do it in different ways, but one of the ways we determine an attribute is through its actualization and through our observance of it. So for instance, we can look at that flag and say that has the attribute of green.
Right.
That has the attribute of black, right? That also has the attribute of it being soft.
Yes.
How do we determine that? Because we are seeing the effects of the attribute moving about. And so we've abstracted it and we've given it a name to identify it.
Yes.
Now we can do that with the more complex the thing is, the more attributes it has. But we don't say that these attributes are things that exist outside of the mind.
Yeah, they do not exist
No.
outside the mind.
They can't exist outside the mind because otherwise they would fall under the rule of empiricism. You'd be able to test them or whatever, right?
It's conceptual.
It's more than conceptual. It's extramental.
I don't.
Extramental, outside the mental. So you have the mental abstraction that you do of a thing,
Okay.
only exists in the mind, like numbers, like space,
Okay.
like time,
Okay.
right? The idea that time and space, like Einstein and others posited, is from this presupposition of positivism, the idea that space and time somehow exist outside. But there's no evidence of that. Space is merely the arbitrary way in which we measure things from one point to another.
Yes.
Time is the measurement of motion or the measurement of change of one thing against the other.
Yes.
And we can use the clock, we can use atomic clocks, or before that, when we didn't have that, we used the sun,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So there are things that only exist in the mind, and there are things that exist outside the mind.
Outside the mind, empirically.
Empirically is what we use to determine the things that exist as extramental particulars, like concrete things, like you, me, this, that flag, etc. Right?
I have a hard time understanding exactly what the implications and what extramental actually is.
So extramental means things that exist outside the mind, like you. You exist because I can see you,
Yes.
and I can determine you, like we mentioned before,
Okay.
as an existent thing.
Okay.
Right? Things, entities.
Okay, entities.
Entities
in
are
general.
extramental.
Okay, so
Numbers are not extramental.
Okay, I
You
agree.
you agree with it? Okay.
They-
So we have to make this very important distinction about how we determine what exists in the world. There are only two things that exist in the world. In our mind and outside our mind.
Yes.
And so once we understand that, and we recognize that the more attributes there are of a thing, the more that thing the more complicated that thing is, you could say. And we recognize that the attributes of a thing, they can be recognized through the application, through the actualization.
Okay.
Like us running,
Oh yes.
walking,
Yes.
right? And so on and so forth,
Yeah.
acting,
Yes.
being loving,
Yes.
right? We express this outside of ourselves. And then we have those intrinsic attributes of
Yeah.
life, time, etc. If that's true of the sum of the parts, it should be true of the one who brought everything into existence and sustains this thing. Because why? You and I, we recognize that we exist by recognizing those attributes.
Yes.
We recognize that you have a will, you act, you have knowledge, you have power, you have wisdom. And that's what makes us what we call a being that can exist at the abstract level, to think at the abstract level. Sorry, not think, not exist, but think at the abstract level. If that's true of us, and we recognize that we have the power to bring about and the knowledge to bring about things, manipulate things, right? We take a piece of wood, we take metal, we transform them into extremely complicated things, right? Sometimes we can do it on our own, sometimes we do it cooperatively,
Right.
because we're limited in our knowledge. If that's true of the sum of the parts, a fortiori, by that very reasoning, it should be true of the whole. The fact that the whole is complicated, it stands to reason that that whole couldn't have come about by itself or through chance and probability. It could only have come about through a being that has to have certain attributes. If you want to call it energy, some atheists, I tend to get through to them better by using the word energy or a source, right? Like Matrix, the source.
There has to be a source for all of this.
Precisely. But the source has to have certain attributes. Otherwise, it defeats the very purpose, the very rationality that we use to determine the things in the world.
Right.
And if we say that this complicated universe came about by a source that lacks any attributes, we're essentially going back to that. Either I don't know, which is I don't care, or we're making a paradigm shift beyond the rationale.
Okay.
So the only solution now is to say that the source that brought the universe into existence and sustains it has to have certain fundamental attributes.
Right.
A will, power,
Okay.
knowledge, and wisdom. Power, a powerless thing is as good as nothing. A will, because it maintains and sustains the universe and its complexity.
Okay.
A knowledge, because the universe exhibits intrinsic laws which allowed it to transform from a point of chaos to relative harmony.
Okay. Yeah. I'll go with
Right?
that, yeah.
So for instance, the four fundamental laws, electromagnetism, gravity, and the two
Strong
nuclear.
nuclear and weak.
Exactly, the weak and the new. They're not too sure about that, right? But anyway, the point being that had it been out of sync, then the universe, as we know, either would have been inert or it wouldn't have had the life-giving properties
Yeah.
that we have.
Yeah.
Everything in the universe therefore points to a mathematical precision that we as human beings could only appreciate this. Go on. Why are you shaking your head?
It's switching a bit to the fine-tuning and watchmaker analogy.
But what other way could we go when we look to the universe and we make precise inferences to the best explanation through all the knowledge that we have accumulated from people who have looked at the world and said, okay, we have mathematically determined how the world works.
Right. With the force.
Through observation.
Right.
Like looking, for instance, at how we've used mathematics to determine the Fibonacci sequence.
Right, yeah.
And we find the Fibonacci sequence as a determinant, as an underlying determinant for most of the complexities within the world,
Yeah.
both in the Earth and outside the Earth. That points to this world being precise in the fact that we are able to measure it and make inferences to the best explanation. We know that the sun is going to rise and set at particular points because of inferences that we've accumulated over centuries, right? Yes. This points to the universe having attributes that point to extreme sophistication, not simplicity, not chaos. Why? Imagine.
I just have trouble with the word complexity, right? Because it sounds like a relative claim that you're making, right? Because let's say you're really good at math, and I'm not good at math. So it will be complex for me, and it won't be complex for you. How are you making complex a word that is not relative?
Because it is relative. Okay. But my point is, when you accumulate relative experiences, okay, you can reach a determination, a very solid determination that is extremely plausible. I'll use tentative language for you. It is extremely plausible that this world points to precision and harmony that is mathematically determined by us, not the opposite.
Yes, it's determined by us. The Fibonacci sequence or the golden ratio or like the beauty we find in this world so is simply our observation.
Yes.
Right? Beyond us, beyond humans, let's keep it simple right now. Beyond humans, this beauty or this complexity is not like there's nothing called beauty or complexity without.
No, we determine that. No doubt we determine that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But that doesn't. Even if you were to eradicate all these terms, it's not like, have you heard of the philosophers like Bishop Berkeley and these other philosophers who believe that things only exist when they're observed. When you don't observe something, like for instance in the forest a tree falls, it won't fall until you've observed it. This is an absurd concept.
It is.
So in other words, what I'm pointing to you here is that this idea that things can only occur or only make sense through observation is untrue. those complexities will still be there, and they could be quite easily understood by another species that may see the world in a different way. But the mathematical precision wouldn't disappear. Just like, for instance, the laws of non-contradiction wouldn't disappear.
I get you. But my question over here is, see, we consider this stuff complex. These are not inherently complex. Right?
I know.
That's where I'm making the distinction.
I know. That's what I'm saying. So we're bound by what we understand of the world. I'm not asking you to make any type of impossible paradigm shift outside of the world. We're bound by the fact that everything that we as human species have determined in regards to the world, including the fact that there was a beginning that we call the Big Bang, including the fact that we put together a periodic table by looking at the nature of the world from the smallest elements, going through the micro world to the macro world to the world that we see, the observational world. These things we've qualified through language, we've quantified through mathematics, but they still exist. Whether we cease to exist tomorrow or not, the complexity and the precision, the way the world works, will always be there.
The complexity won't be there, but the world will be there.
No, the complexity in that everything is interrelated. If you want to call that complexity, you can call that complexity. If you have a better word, for instance, that everything is contingent upon another contingent thing, or every cause is determined by a previous cause, or causes in the present, whatever words you want to use, those laws will always be there.
Yes.
Right. Now, just to get back to the point now, if that's true, and that's a plausible explanation, and we understand this through the attributes of us as human beings, it would stand to reason that the source that brought the universe into existence must have attributes of if you want to use of a great level.
But this is an observed principle, right?
That's the only way we can make sense of the world. But the question now is, even though it's observed, is there any way of making sense of the world without that? And the only answer to that is, I don't care. I don't want to think. I don't want to know. And no human being lives life like that.
I agree.
Right. Only the person who is either a hypocrite or mad.
Or ignorant.
Yeah, ignorant. Extreme ignorance, right? But even ignorance can be turned around. I'm talking about a person who's just, mad, or just playing games, not being sincere. Because a person can be ignorant but be sincere, right? Yeah. So when we claim that there is a creator, you can use that as people who are unsure, they can look at the probabilistic factor. Is it more plausible that the universe is eternal without a source outside of itself, such that the causes you try and make sense of the actual infinite existing within reality? Going back to what we understood, which is that the present could not come about except through causes going back in the past, or the universe had a beginning, the universe exists now, it extends back to a particular point, and all of this is sustained by a creator. Those are the only other two factors, the only two possibilities, I should say. So when the Quran, for instance, came during the time of the Prophet, it didn't deal with the atheists, because it took as a given the obvious nature that the universe is an evidence of a creator. It's like, for instance, it's a funny sort of meme that I came across recently, right, where it said, asking for evidence of a creator whilst living in creation is like a fish swimming in the ocean asking for evidence of H2O. This universe, the fact that we exist, the attributes that we acknowledge, if we think deeply enough, it's true what Allah says in the Quran, which is, Afillahi shak. Is there any doubt? Fatir as-samawati wal ard, in the originator of the heavens and the earth? There should be no doubt in the originator of the heavens and the earth.
When you put it like that, when you put it that this world is a creation, that obviously presupposes a creator. But we never got to the point where you proved it's a creation, right? Because that's a circular argument.
Just do it through inferences to the best explanation. All I've done here is given you inferences to the best explanation. In other words, Islam acknowledges that there is a certain level of faith. What does Allah say in the beginning of the Quran? Allah says that That when Allah says Alif Lam Mim ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, and then God says those who believe in the unseen world. So belief is predicated on a certain level of belief in things that we don't see. But what Islam is pointing to, what Islam is pointing to is that just as there are certain things that you don't see with your own eyes, but you recognize it to be true through your personal experiences, know it to be true up to a point of an obvious degree. You don't see it, but you recognize it. You know, no one needs to tell you that your mother is your mother, right? No one needs to tell you that you have a brain. No one needs to tell you that you have a heart. You need to open it up. You know this because you've accumulated evidences in the real world. And so you have a certain level of faith in certain things that you don't see.
I wouldn't put that as faith. I would, if you follow the evidence, that means it's true, right? Because you can have evidence of something, and if you only believe things and you have evidence of it, then it's true. Because if something is not true, there would be no evidence of it.
Precisely. So one of the ways that we find Islam to be true is in the man Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the knowledge that he brought. If it is true that the Prophet, as a Prophet, was a man who was receiving revelation from, as he claims, the all-knowledgeable, all-wise, there should be some evidence of this being showing his knowledge and his wisdom outside of the obvious, which is the world. This man claimed to have been received revelation from God. So one of the things that God shows in the Quran is prophecies of the future. I'm not sure whether you've come across any of the prophecies that the Prophet ﷺ both.
I have.
And what do you make of them?
I'll just clarify them because I'm not really sure of them. I know about the deserts turning green. Right?
What do you make of that? You find that interesting?
I've seen it.
You've seen it with your own eyes, right?
I went to Mecca and Medina while I was driving through.
Do you know when the last time, because the hadith says, the Prophet said the day of judgment will not come until the lands of Arabia return to being green and pastures. Pastures.
Oh yeah.
Right? Land that is livable, green and pasteurized, right? Do you know when the last time the lands of Arabia, and I'm not talking about the monsoons that take place in the north of Arabia, that takes place annually. I'm talking about the lands of Arabia. He makes it general. The last time was in a period called the Holocene period, which was approximately 7,000 BCE. There's evidence of this through, I think they're called petroglyphs, the carvings that you find on stones. But there's also, quite fascinating, there's satellite imagery of the waterways that are now dry, carving right the way across the Arabian Peninsula, just like on Mars. They've recently found, they're speculating that Mars might have at one point had a lot of water.
I didn't catch up with that.
Okay, so there's evidence apparently that, and the reason why that is because they find these dry riverbeds all over the planet. The same is true of Arabia. So this is a proof that the Prophet is giving us a dual prophecy. Not only is he saying that the lands of Arabia were green and pasteurized at one point, he's saying the lands of Arabia will become green. Now, the only time in history, one of the things that the scholars of Islam have said is what differentiates the prophecies of true prophets is that they are detailed. They're not.
I know that.
They're not. Yeah, they're not sort of relative or vague and whatever, right? Have you heard of Nostradamus?
Yeah, I have.
Yes.
I bring that up.
Yeah. So the Nostradamus quatrains, I used to read them back in the day.
Yeah.
Although Islam says that it's forbidden for us to read it. But I used to read it when I was younger. It was so vague that at first it was, wow, this is amazing when you're a young boy, right? But when you grow, as you're growing older, you then come across information. You think to yourself, well, these are vague. It could have taken place this time, that time, this time, that time, this place, etc.
If you let the universe happen for a billion years, a billion things will happen.
A billion things could happen.
3 things. Then
exactly.
Yeah.
So the Prophet is saying here that the land will become green. The only time that they became green is today.
Yeah. I've seen it myself.
Yes. So it's a dual prophecy. Now the question is, where did the Prophet derive this knowledge from? 7,000 BCE. By that time, the Arabian Peninsula had been dry for thousands of years. The Prophet is putting essentially all of his eggs into one basket. He's saying, if I'm not a prophet, here's my claim, and it's going to be disproven at some point. So you have prophecies that are now becoming proven today. The Prophet said there will come a time where the naked, barefooted Bedouin Arabs will compete in the construction of high buildings.
Yes.
The only time this has taken place is today, after they struck, what they call black gold in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah.
The Prophet ﷺ literally described it.
Well, what about the possibility that if you let humanity go on and just time do its thing, a lot of things will happen. And
Yes.
if you've written down some of them,
Yes.
and they are semi-relative, like they're not that unrealistic.
Yes.
Right? Because
It's entirely possible. I know where you're going. I know where you're going.
Then,
But I'm asking you to look at this from a cumulative point of view.
Okay.
What the Prophet is saying is that if I am not a prophet, this is the implication. If I'm not a prophet, and I'm here for ulterior motives, and the Prophet, remember, we have his life story written down meticulously, unlike any other human being on the face of the planet. If you want to call a Muslim an extremist, this is what they were extreme in. They were extreme in looking at this one man and being so convinced by his character that they wrote down practically everything that he said and taught by way of his speech and actions and his tacit approvals. I mean, no other human being's life has been written down and more faithfully preserved than the Prophet Muhammad.
okay.
So we have a man's life who's been meticulously recorded. If he was a charlatan, you would ask yourself, well, why would he do this? Have a look forget all these prophecies that he made that came true centuries later that you're claiming. If you give it enough time, they'll come true, right? Have a look at the prophecies that he gave during his lifetime against his enemies. He said to the pagan Arabs, he said that the Quran is a miracle of God. A miracle of God in terms of its, the argument, the structure, in terms of its eloquence, right?
Yeah.
The Quran challenged the Arabs to bring a book like it. They couldn't do it. Let me just go through the argument because I know, just so that you appreciate it, right?
Yeah, we're on the same page. I know this argument. Yes.
So the argument is very powerful. If you know the argument, let me just give it to you very quickly. Produce a Quran like it, they couldn't do it. Produce 10 surahs like it, they couldn't do it. Produce a surah like it, which is 3 verses long, they couldn't do it. What they decided to do was something so much more grievous and devastating and more of a gamble to their livelihood and their future, which was put their life and their children's lives and their wealth and their society on the line. They would rather go to war with the Prophet than meet the challenge, which they believed prior to that they were the master orators. You had people like Walid ibn Mughira, who was described as the greatest of the poets. You had Imr al-Qais. You had all these poets who they used to compete against each other to the point where they felt no one can match us in the eloquence. So what does the Quran do?
How do you quantify and measure eloquence exactly?
It's not about measuring.
Okay.
It's about the challenge. The challenge.
I agree, but you pose the challenge.
I'll tell you why it doesn't matter.
Okay.
If the best and most eloquent of the Arabs failed to meet the challenge, despite the fact that it was in their best interest to do the easiest thing. Imagine it's like, I'll give you an analogy. Imagine you're starving you're starving and you know you're about to die. And I present to you a lovely little cake right there.
Yeah.
You have the ability to be able to reach for the cake, but you decide, and then you pull your hand back and you die. Is that from rationality?
No.
No, it's not reasonable, is it?
Yeah, but see, when you bring forth the argument about the Quran's eloquence, its non-contradiction, and all the other qualities, I'm asking you, how do you measure these qualities? Right?
We measure it by the most eloquent. They failed. The Quran, by default, became the standard by which.
How? Isn't that just presupposing that the Quran is the most eloquent? Because
No. But why would it presuppose? The presupposition was the best of the poets are alive. They believe in their false religion. A new religion has come along to claim not only is your religion false,
Okay.
but your standard of Arabic, we are claiming, we have come up with a source that is more eloquent than whatever your standard is. We'll give your standard. What you choose a standard, right? So the Quran isn't going by its rules per se. It's saying, here's your standard. You believe this is your standard? Fine. Here's the Quran. Now use your standard and disprove the Quran. Why didn't a single one of those Arab leaders say, listen, what's wrong with you? The Quran is written by an illiterate. He went up to a mountain, a man known to not be able to read and write, and he comes down blazing with poetry, and you guys are sitting there admitting that, you know what, this is not from a poet, this is not from a soothsayer. We've heard the speech of the soothsayers, this is not from soothsaying. This can't be from a magician. We've heard what the magicians have to say. This is not like that. So they're going through the categories, the best of them, and they're admitting defeat. So what do the Arab leaders do? They have to now do the hard thing,
which is the what?
Which is place their entire life. So as soon as the Quran defeated them, it became the standard, the default standard, the de facto standard.
Okay, but in today's day and age, correct? Because this is an open challenge of the Quran, right?
Yes.
Regardless of what time it is.
But here it is. The fact that the Quran became the default, you can say that although it's open, and there were certain people just after the time of the Prophet, like Musaylama, he came out and claimed that he was receiving revelation. And he even came out with poetry which was so nonsensical that even people today who are not well versed in Arabic, they see the Quran, they see, like the Orientalists, they see the Quran, they see what this man Musaylama came up with, which is Ya Wabr, the frog, or whatever it is, right? And they say, well, this is not eloquence. In no way does it reach the notions of the concepts of eloquence that the scholars understood whilst looking at the Quran as a de facto standard.
Okay.
So that means that because the Quran is now the de facto, the challenge is not going to be met. That's why the Quran already answers the question. It says that bring your helpers together and bring a Quran like it, and you will fail, and you will most certainly fail. Why? Because the Quran is the de facto standard. The best of you failed. That means the Quran is now the standard. There can never be a people who will come after that.
Okay, so you're basically
what we're saying is the AI, if you were to bring AI along, it would not be able to meet the challenge.
Because you're using the Quran as a standard to measure itself.
Yeah.
Right? You're saying because Quran said, self-proclaimed, basically. In the Quran, it was said that the Quran is the most eloquent book.
Why?
Because
the best of them couldn't meet the challenge. So
yes, but that is presupposing that the Quran is the most eloquent book.
No, what is a presupposition to you?
Like it's already assuming before.
Right. And what is the challenge that's being made? Is it a self-contained challenge, or is it open to other people?
It's open, but the standard which you are using is how eloquent something is, and your measurement of eloquent is just how much like the Quran it is.
No, but okay, I think you're missing the point here. The eloquence here isn't beyond the human standard. The Quran is measuring it by the human standard that was set by the Arabs who had already reached this stage of eloquence. So the Quran is saying, your standard, whatever you want to call it, here's our standard.
Okay, so I'm asking you, what exactly is the standard? Because I really want to know.
Okay, look.
You define the.
I don't think that's necessary to explain. The point here is that you have the option of going to some of the Orientalists who have reached a high level of Arabic eloquence. Just go to them and ask them, anyone in history, ask them, can you, through your learning, come together and meet the challenge of the Quran? And then see what they have to say. Because the challenge is open. The best of them couldn't do it. The Quran became the de facto standard. Not because it presupposes it, it's because by default, they failed. The people to whom the challenge was given, they failed. Now the Quran is the standard of Arabic eloquence. So it means that anyone that comes thereafter will not be able to meet the challenge, even though the challenge is there. And that's a proof of the fact that if it was produced through an illiterate, then the question then arises, how can an illiterate, let alone a community, come together and produce a book the likes of which the Arab poets who were non-Muslims at that time couldn't reach. Now that's not my point. The other miracle I was going to say to you is during the time of the Prophet actually gave challenges to the polytheists that were effectively, you could say, anyone looking in would say, if this man wasn't absolutely confident of the future, he would be jeopardizing his mission even before it began.
Is this related to the statues?
No, this is related to a man by the name of Abu Lahab.
Oh, yeah. Please.
You heard of this?
Yeah.
So the surah that captures this prophecy states, and I'll give you the background. The Prophet, when there was an event like an emergency situation that was going to take place, they didn't have bells in that time in Arabia. What they would do is they would go to a particular place, a mountain, and they would say Ya Sabaha. They would make this call, emergency call, right? And everyone would gather. The city would come out immediately and gather around this mountain to see what the emergency was. So the Prophet did this. And remember, by this point, the Prophet's reputation already preceded him. They had already recognized that this man is as-sadiq al-amin, the truthful and trustworthy, before he received revelation.
Okay.
He was never known to be a liar. His reputation was such. So he came out and he said to his people, if I tell you that there is an army about to come over the mountain and attack me, would you believe me? And they said, yes, for we have never known you to lie. So he said, then know that I've come to you with a grave warning from my Lord. At this point, Abu Lahab, who was an enemy and was committed, him and his wife was committed towards literally contradicting the Prophet wherever he went. Deep-seated hatred. He cursed the Prophet and said, may your hands perish. Immediately Allah came in defense of his Prophet and revealed the following prophecy. It's a dual prophecy. The prophecy has it that Abu Lahab, may his two hands perish and may he perish. And it says that his wife will carry the fuel that will be used to punish her in hellfire. So what the Quran is stating here is the following. No matter what happens, Abu Lahab and or his wife are going to hellfire. They're not going to accept Islam. Imagine again, you have two options before you. The most difficult thing, which is placing your life on the line, and the easiest thing, which is, okay, you know what, Prophet Muhammad, you've claimed that your creator is knowledgeable of all things. He said that me and or my wife are not going to go to hellfire. Okay, you know what? Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Khalas, your religion has been falsified.
Yeah, but you cannot really believe in something just like that, right?
Why not?
It's like the Pascal's wager thing. Like, belief is not a switch you can turn on and off, right? So there is a perspective in which you can say, even if Abu Lahab would have said Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Rasulullah, it wouldn't have mattered, because would he truly have believed it? And it does, like, he could say it.
That's the whole point.
Right? Yeah.
You've hit the nail on the head. It doesn't matter whether he truly would have believed in it. What matters is that the prophecy has been falsified. The prophecy had it that Abu Lahab and his wife are going to go to hellfire, meaning they're going to die as non-Muslims.
This cannot be falsified.
1 second. It can be falsified by him claiming to be
claiming, but believing.
No, it's not about belief.
Because
have you heard of the third category? Belief, disbelief, and hypocrisy. Have you heard of a hypocrite?
Yeah.
Do you know that they were hypocrites during the time of the Prophet who said Ashhadu la ilaha illallah? Right? But they used intrigue to try and undermine the Muslims. And the prophecy was specific to Abu Lahab and his wife, not to any of the leaders, not to any old Tom, Dick and Harry, because Allah knows who is going to believe and who is not going to believe on the basis of the deep-seated hatred. Abu Lahab, you know how long he lived after that? 10 years. He went through a lifetime of seeing his fellow Arabs, pagan Arabs, become Muslims, and his hatred increased and increased. His wife used to literally pour, garbage over the Prophet's back whilst he was praying. So it's a dual prophecy. And for us, this is a cumulative case that during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, he made prophecies that literally were placing all your eggs into one basket. And they were proven to be true. They weren't falsified. Just like the Quran came with the understanding that this is the default, during their time, during the time of the Prophet, the Quran was proven to be true. And there's other prophecies as well. So when we bring the aspect of prophecies, The cumulative case tells us that the idea that you can explain this away through chance and probability becomes so improbable that the only reasonable explanation is that it must have been from a source outside of the universe.
If he's done it so many times,
Yes.
with so much on the line,
Exactly.
then there's a higher chance that there is
Yes.
something that exists.
So this is the faith that we have in Islam. But there's a moral case as well, my brother. The moral case is that Islam calls to what? To things that will make you not the second best or third best, but the best version of yourself. When the Quran, for instance, told us that alcohol and gambling and divining arrows, meaning superstition, have been forbidden for you because they are an abomination of Satan's handiwork. We didn't need scientists to tell us that in alcohol and gambling there is greater evil than good. In the Quran, Allah tells us that in alcohol there is some good, but the evil is far greater.
Yeah, but that can be observed. Like, if someone were to write the Quran hypothetically, then they would have observed this. Like, if you were making a guidebook on how to live, and you were in the alcohol section, you would put it in the alcohol is a lot more bad than good, even before science existed. Because,
But check this out. During that time, they were steeped in alcohol.
yeah, but
They were steeped in gambling. They were steeped in this concept that if your father passes away, you can marry your mother. They were steeped in all these evils. For instance, the poor amongst them used to bury their daughters alive. So the Prophet doesn't just bring a revelation to tell them that God should be worshipped in a particular way, that there is a concept of God. He doesn't just come up with arguments against atheism. He comes up with a comprehensive way of life that goes down to the smallest things to the most important things. And the lived experience tells us, like, by the fruits ye shall know them, right? You've heard that concept, by the fruits ye shall know them. The lived experience tells us that when you adopt Islam, you live a life of harmony because you find a balance in life. But if you turn away from that, Allah assures you in the Quran that you're going to suffer the consequences through the consequences of the evil increasing in life. So look at the world today. You could be argued that we are as materialistic and as far away from Allah as we've ever been. And yet what we are finding that materialism and technology isn't bettering the human way of life, it's making it worse, to the point where people in some of the most advanced countries in the world, the suicide rates are through the charts. So Islam taught us that these things are going to occur. Like, for instance, the Prophet ﷺ, he told us that when illicit sexual intercourse becomes prevalent within a society, then wait for the diseases that your forefathers never heard of. So when you look at the cumulative case of a man living in the middle of the desert, why is it that Allah chose an illiterate man? It's because of the fact that it establishes that this man must have been receiving revelation from something outside of the human race.
But if there are records of stuff like this being talked about before the Prophet, for example, I know of one prophecy that was discussed about cells being made out of water, right? That is discussed in the Quran. And a lot of people argue for this and say, look, this is a miracle. You couldn't have known this when the Prophet was alive. But there are records of ancient Greek philosophers hypothesizing the same thing.
Yeah, no doubt that the scholars have spoken about this. But here's the argument to that. The Quran, firstly, is not a book of science. It's a book of guidance. It gives you, in its poetic language, in the language of eloquence, in the way that it was revealed, it gives you information in regards to the world. If you have a look at what the Quran contains and what the Prophet himself said outside of the Quran, what you find is the following. Why is it that the Prophet was able to filter out all the false informations around the world and give you information that is, at the very least, congruent with what we know of the world today?
What about
Does that make sense?
Yeah. How was the Prophet? How did the Prophet filter out the false information and filter the good information in the Quran? Yes, but what about the surah that talks about reproduction and
the nutfa, the
sperm
alaqa,
coming
the
from
mudghah?
the
Yes.
What is
Again, very, very simple explanation. If you read the Quran itself and the way it's described, it speaks about between one area and another. In other words,
So
it's
between the backbone and the...
yes, and it's in other words, it's not telling you, it's not a science book telling you that this is exactly where it comes from. It's telling you that the male and the female, they come from a particular part, a particular region of the body. Unfortunately, the Christians and the atheists, the enemies of Islam, what they do is they firstly write down the rules that are false to begin with, and then they concoct an argument which doesn't even represent what the Quran is saying. So when the Quran talks about sulbi wa tara'ib, it's talking about in very general terms that yes, the water of the man, again ma'a, the water of the man comes from a particular region. I mean, it doesn't talk about testicles or anything like that.
So it's a language thing.
The Quran isn't a science book, my friend. It's just a book of guidance. It talks in general terms, like for instance that the heavens and the earth were once one joint entity, and Allah He split them apart. فَفَتَقَنَاهُمَا, Allah split them or tore them apart, and He created from water every living thing. Now, in general, that's true. It's consistent with some of the aspects of the world that we know. There's nothing contradictory there. But I'm talking about the cumulative understanding. An illiterate man amongst an ummi nation.
Is this fact about Prophet Muhammad being an illiterate man been confirmed by historians that aren't Muslims or external historians? Like, has this been confirmed by them?
Why would we need external sources when we have the sources themselves from multiple individuals who spoke about this and said, I mean, how is that outside the realms and possibility? Have a look at Arabia, a bunch of people living in the middle of the desert whose preoccupation was mainly through commerce and trade, right? They went over to the various areas of the Arabian Peninsula. They were not known for their learning. The people who were known for their learning at that time were the Persians, the two superpowers, and the Byzantines.
The math and the science.
Exactly.
All of it.
Exactly. These guys were in the middle of a desert. For centuries, their tradition wasn't painting and sculpture, it was poetry. It was an oral tradition.
If there was an external source that confirmed that Prophet Muhammad was truly illiterate.
Why? If you have, for instance, you have multiple sources who claimed that they are speaking the truth in regards to the Prophet Muhammad, and they actually believe that it is one of the great crimes. I'll give you an example. You know, one of the most outside the Quran. Do you know what the greatest attested hadith is attributed to the Prophet? It's that whoever, the Prophet said, "Man kadaba aliyu muta'ammida." He said, whoever creates a lie against me, let him take a seat in the hellfire. This was narrated by, do you know how many companions? 78 of the companions narrated this. I think it's 78 or 87. I think it's 78. Ibn Hajar, he speaks about this. 78 of the companions have been recorded to have transmitted this hadith. It's one of the highest attested, if not the highest attested. In other words, if it's attested by 78, you can imagine this being known by hundreds, if not thousands of the companions, that you don't lie against the Prophet. Not a single lie, because the Prophet said, take your seat in the hellfire. These people were committed to the belief of heaven and hell. That was what they lived and died upon. So if you have what we refer to as akhbar, news being transmitted, being authenticated, like a science, sitting down, he learned it from him. Where did he learn it from? Is this man known to be truthful? Is this man known to be precise? They had a science where they knew, for instance, it's permissible to take from person A because his memory was very strong whilst he was young. But when he moved, for instance, to Baghdad, he became old and senile. So when he transmits anything from that point, reject it, because so that's the precision with which the Muslims were. This is the science of hadith that the Muslims were attributing to the Prophet, using to attribute to the Prophet. So if you have multiple transmissions coming in, you can reasonably infer to a high degree of certainty that when they said that the Prophet was this, that, and the other, that he was. I mean, if we don't go by that standard for Islam, anything lesser than that, we would have to reject. So science and history wouldn't even be possible. We have a far less degree of certainty that we afford science, that we're willing to afford the sciences of hadith. And yet the argument here is that if you give up on the hadith sciences, a fortiori, anything less than that, you have to say, well, it can't be true. That would make a mockery. Exactly. So that would make a mockery of history. So this is why Islam and Muslims, we have a very, very strong understanding that if you learn your religion, my brother, with deeply, critically, then the only conclusion you can come to is that the weight of evidence has to be that, number one, there is a creator, and number two, this man has to have been a prophet. It's not possible that a man could say all this, just put it all on the line, and all of it turns out to be true. So what's your name, by the way?
Samad.
Hamza. Samad, listen, I appreciate your time. If you have any more questions, feel free. Otherwise, look, go home and think about what I've said.
I know, but I really appreciate it.
No
Thank
problem.
you so much, because
No problem.
no one has been able to answer my questions like as deeply as you have been. I've searched through YouTube. I've tried to ask my parents. That didn't go well because they believe it out of my parents believe it, and they didn't really have answers to my questions, which I really hated, and that really made me turn away from Islam. And I was just looking for someone who can talk to me logically and show me with like evidence and rationality and with a calm mind. And you've done that.
I hope I have, because for me, I was at a point in life where I was meandering as well. And when I came across Islam, it took time for me to understand it. But one thing I did do, and I was recommended to do by brothers that encouraged me towards practicing my religion, they said, make lots of supplication to the one who hears and sees all. They said it is absolutely imperative that if you are sincerely looking for the truth, you have to communicate with Allah. You have to communicate with His source. And Allah guarantees that He will respond. He guarantees that the sincere person who calls upon Him, He'll guide him. So maybe it was at this point that you came, Allah guided you to come to Speaker's Corner and has guided you to speak to myself. And maybe this is just the start of your journey back to Islam and looking at the sources more critically. I would recommend don't lend your ear to anyone and everyone. That's where the doubts begin to come into your heart.
But I also want to keep an open mind. Like, I wouldn't want to simply say no to an evidence just because it goes against me. That's not the way you are. Yeah, that's a bias. I wouldn't want to. If I believe that something is true, I believe it out of evidence. And if there is someone presenting something else, like the stronger evidence, I would rather believe the stronger evidence than my friend.
Exactly, and that's all anyone can ever do. And Allah assures us in the Quran that Allah does not place a burden upon a soul more than it can bear, provided you're sincere to the evidence. And the evidences start cumulatively. The most fundamental evidences that I gave you in regards to the laws, you can't make truth claims without these. And we find that many people, like the atheists who deny the existence of God, if you speak to them, they end up denying these fundamental laws, which is extraordinary.
I do not. I would like to stay within the realms of logic and reason, because that is the only place where we can communicate. Like, communication presupposes these laws and everything. So I agree with all of that.
No worries. Nice for your time.
And do you have a YouTube channel or anywhere I can catch you on?
I mean, these guys record and put it on. I don't have anything myself.
Okay. And any books or sources you would recommend for me to read?
Yes.
That would convey it in a way you did, like with so much precision, evidence, logic.
Two scholars that have really helped me in my journey are two scholars that are well known. Some of their books are ubiquitously found all across the Muslim world. Ibn Taymiyyah, Tay. Taymiyyah, Taymiyyyah, and Ibn Qayyim, Ibnul, Qayyim, Qayyim. These a lot of books are in English. They've had a huge influence on the way I think, the way I understand Islam. it's not for nothing that Ibn Taymiyyah was referred to by the term Shaykh al-Islam, the Shaykh of Islam, because of his time. He had an extraordinary mind, and he spoke about these fundamental laws, how to think, how he refuted, how he took on the entire philosophical world and attempted to refute their concepts of determining the world through rationality purely. He said that this is an absurd way of trying to reach certain truths. Okay. So have a read through that, and inshallah, hopefully, that'll give you a better understanding. Nice, thank you again, okay? Take care, inshallah. Thank you. Okay, take care.